And now joining us, former Chief of Staff under President Bill Clinton and McLarty Associates Chairman Mack McLarty. Mack, good to see you.
Maria, good to be with you always.
So your reaction to all of these new developments this week, from the tariffs on steel and aluminum to Gary Cohen's resignation, and the president basically not going toward his urging to not do these tariffs?
Big news and big development for sure. I think Gary Cohen's resignation, while it might have been something he had certainly contemplated before, I think it showed a lack of full process. As head of the National Economic Council, it didn't seem that the process was followed in terms of getting everyone's input. I think we're seeing some of that now, what I would call kind of a course correction, if you will. I think the initial decision was somewhat of a sledgehammer approach. I think now we're trying to see it pull back a bit with this potential carve-out to Mexico and other countries, including Canada, our two trading partners on the north and south. And I think you're probably seeing Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, who have weighed in regarding security matters, as your White House reporter noted. And I think on the NAFTA itself, you'll see Secretary Perdue at Agriculture have a big voice in this, as he has had in the past. Gary Cohen's a big loss, Maria.
Mack, how important is this trade deficit? I mean, when you were in the job, you had the president's ear. When you see that America's on the losing end of so many of these trade deals, should we be worried about that, or does it not matter? The priority should be economic growth, and if it takes away from economic growth, maybe it's the wrong move. Your take?
It's a complicated subject. Let me try to hit a couple of points quickly. You asked the right question. I think the president's instincts are right, and I think that showed in the campaign. However, I think some of the approaches are wrong. I do not believe the trade deficit is the way to measure this. It's a good shorthand, easy message to convey, but I don't think it's accurate. Dr. Godin at the Peterson Institute, and that's a pretty thoughtful, serious, right-of-center institution, feels the same way. He thinks the deficit is the main concern here. So I think we've got...
The budget deficit or the trade deficit?
No, the budget deficit.
Okay.
Thank you for correcting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. No. So my point is, I don't think the trade deficit is the right way to measure whether we're winning or losing. But again, I think the president is right to focus on this issue. I think that reflects the American people and many people in Congress, although not all Republicans. But I think there are some more artful, better ways, more effective ways to go at it. I think that's what Gary Cohen was advocating.
Mack, to your point, it's Dagan McDowell. To borrow something that Mary Kissel from the Wall Street Journal said on this program earlier, that the trade deficit is not a debt to someone. It's not a debt to another nation. And this is where conservatives, real true conservatives, have a problem with what the president's doing, is making so much about the trade deficit and saying peep, nothing, nada, niente about the budget deficits, the annual budget deficits now running at $1 trillion because of the spending plan out of the Republicans, and also refusing to even talk about entitlement fixes for Medicare and Social Security. Well, how are we going to defend ourselves against China with Medicare checks 10 years from now?
Well, Dagan, you made the case, and I think you affirmed what I said. Mary's paper and Mary's editorial staff have written very thoughtfully about the tariffs and about trade and the importance of exports and kind of the right way to proceed here. I was very proud that during the Clinton administration we had a good economy. There were a lot of factors, but we did move from a deficit to a surplus and balance the budget. And I really think my generation was not sure that was achievable. So I think you make the right point. I think we have to be realistic. I think we have to be honest with the American people. Again, I think the president's instincts in some cases or impulses are right and reflect some of the unease in the country, but I don't think the approach in this case is the right one. I think there's a much more thoughtful, serious way to go at it. And again, I think the process internally in the administration, the NEC, the head of the National Economic Council, which we actually established in the Clinton administration, that was a new agency to really be parallel with the National Security Council. It's essential that you coordinate policy through those agencies. It does not appear that was the case here.
Just real quick, Mary,
ahead,
I'll let you go, but I wanted to say that line about fighting China with Medicare checks, I actually borrowed that from the Wall Street Journal editorial page.
Great.
So that was not original.
Well, it's a good line.
Mack, Mary Kissel here. Very briefly, Mike Murphy on the panel here brought up a great point earlier. He said, look, China is dumping steel. It's true. They get state subsidies from their banking sector. That's true. Their steel on their intellectual property, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, that's fine. But it raises an important question. How do you punish them without punishing American consumers, without having job losses here in America? That's the issue that we have with the tariffs, because we're going to get net job losses with this approach. But what's the right approach?
Well, there's a number of concerns, a number of factors, as you point out. On the specific steel issue, Mary, as you well know, there are many other importers of steel or exporters of steel to the United States that are far ahead of China. And I think the concern is, while the President and his team are focusing on China and fair trade practices, which I think is correct, I commend them for that,
right,
but a lot of other of our allies and friends and trading partners get caught in the middle. So I think the Chinese know they have an overcapacity issue in China. I think they are perhaps willing to close some of those plants.
Right.
I think we should pursue that. Mary, that's the course I would at least try to explore.
Mac, real quick, let me switch gears here. Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, said that he is going to direct a second counsel, a special counsel. He is considering this, having a special second counsel to investigate what the FBI and the Department of Justice did in terms of bringing that dossier to the FISA court, but not telling them that the Democrats paid for it and the Hillary Clinton campaign paid for it. He's going to investigate that. Should there be a second special counsel looking at what took place in the last election?
Special counsels and independent counsels always kind of have a dynamic of their own. We've seen that in the past and over time. And Maria, I think there's been a continuing discussion, concern, debate over the balance between privacy, which is what this is really about with the FISA court, and our national security. And I think that's the issue here. I'm not quite in a position to say yes, there should be, or no, there should not be. I think we should be very careful in proceeding down the special counsel approach.
Are you surprised at what took place at the top of the FBI?
If you read from what you read, there was some behavior, some decision, some communication that certainly was not appropriate and not befitting of that agency. And I think on balance, we view the FBI as protectors of our country, and we hold them to the highest standard, as we should.
Which is why you are to read these texts of this bias against Donald Trump from the very people who are supposed to be investigating him and Hillary Clinton is troubling.
I understand your point.
Matt, good to see you, sir.
Thank you, Maria.
Mack McLarty.